Hello everyone, my name is Ross McGill. I hope you are well. Thank you for joining me in this webinar, How Active Learning Supports Cognition in Our Primary Pupils. A lot of you have signed up from lots of different places across the world, and this is also being broadcast live on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. So if you're logged into those devices, then you will be able to leave some comments on the live stream, which would be great, and we'll pin some of your questions to our participants. And you'll see on the holding slide that I am delighted to be joined by Professor Lauren Sherar and Jon Smedley, who I'll introduce shortly. Just before we get into the details, if I just give you a little demographic map of where everyone is tuning in. So we've got people tuning in from lots and lots of different places, which is always very, very exciting. So there's our world map, and I believe I've got someone watching live from New Zealand. So if that's the case, please do say hello in the chat box. If we close in to where we are broadcasting from here in England, you'll see lots of people across the country, across the UK, tuning in to find out more about research on cognition and active learning, and to find some practical solutions for our classrooms. And if you're interested in a bit more, just kind of general statistics of people tuning in. So we had 200 people sign up, and there'll be people watching live just off chance on all those different channels. So without further ado, I'm just going to come off the slides because we're going to have just a general chat about cognition, active learning. Let me just put that back on there. Just to kind of go through if you're in the right place. So we're here on a webinar of TeachActive. I'm going to introduce our people presenting in a moment. You'll see them pop up on the screen. And again, as that mentioned, just in terms of kind of online etiquette, you'll be able to leave a comment in the chat box, and we'll pin your question on the screen so that everybody can see what you've asked, and we'll ask our people presenting to respond. But a bit of a kind of talking heads today rather than show some slides. And at the very end of our session, we're going to do a little demonstration on the brilliant tool TeachActive, which I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of months now, looking at their solutions that they provide to our primary teachers in terms of lesson planning. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Lauren Sherar and Jon to join me. So here they come. I'm going to ask them each to take a moment just to introduce themselves to everybody watching and tell us what you do. So let's start with Lauren. How are you, Lauren?
Oh, hi, Ross. I'm very well, thank you. My pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. Always seems quite surreal to think that many people are behind the screen, but it's really my pleasure to be here. And thank you so much to Ross for the invitation.
Thank you, Lauren. And to Jon, could you say hello to everyone, Jon?
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I've stayed in the office today, as some of you may be able to see, so joining you from Chester in the UK, and yeah, delighted to be working with you all and yeah, talking about something which is very dear to my heart.
No, Jon won't mention it, but I will. But a recently award-winning organisation, Jon, isn't that right?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so this year we've been lucky enough to have the Education Resource Award and the BET Award for Teaching, Learning and Wellbeing as well. So yeah, it's nice to be recognised for those. Thank you.
Good. Now we'll come back to TeachActive, but Lauren, can I just ask you to just describe your day-to-day role? I know you'll be have lots of things going on at Loughborough, but just a general introduction into your background, and then we'll slowly move into your research, which is fascinating.
Yeah, sure. So as Ross said, my name is Lauren Sherar. I'm a professor of physical activity and public health at Loughborough University. I guess for some of you international people, it's right in the middle. We're amongst lots of fields in the Midlands, in the middle of the UK. Our university is known for sport. I think especially those of you that are within the UK will probably recognise it and its kind of reputation within the sporting field. We're also very kind of knowledgeable and have lots of expertise around around how physical activity relates to health, which is kind of where my area of expertise comes from. So as well as being a professor of physical activity and public health, I'm also the Associate Dean for Teaching, fairly newly appointed. August 1 was when I started. So in that, it's slightly different, I guess, for lots of your backgrounds, but does overlay in the fact that I'm kind of responsible for high standards of teaching, good student experience, but within the university setting. My general research area really relates to public health. So I'm interested in how we can get a nation to move more, sit less, for their health, whether that be physical health, mental health, or a little bit of the focus of this webinar when it relates to academic achievement and also cognition. So while I do work across the lifespan, my main focus area is within children and young people, and certainly that's where my passion lies. And I've recently done some work, well, over the last probably 5 years, around active learning and how that could be used as an intervention for schools.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Very fascinating. And I'd encourage everyone watching to post some questions for Lauren. There's an opportunity to pick her brains and her expertise. And we'll be digging into the details of some of her insights shortly. Jon, I'm going to bring you in now. Jon, could you just give us a little bit more in terms of your background, your life as a teacher, how you established TeachActive?
Of course. Yeah, so I was a teacher for 18 years. I've taught primary and secondary, but yeah, certainly mainly primary school. I was a local authority PE advisor on the Wirral, for any of you who know the Wirral, hence my love of getting children active. And then I went back into school and I was a deputy head for 7 years and then left 6 years ago. I always said I did love my job, but I'm very lucky and very fortunate in my role now. I mean, TeachActive do two things. Yes, we have the resource, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, but mainly I work with lots of schools and have done over the last 6 years about the opportunities to make the school day more active, about why physical activity is so important, in particular, perhaps now more than ever, and actually about the links, as Lauren said, about to the wider benefits, and also including academic achievement within that, as well as the wider benefits to the whole child. So yeah, very lucky enough to do that, and that takes up the most of my role at the moment.
Keeps you busy. Now, yeah. Jon, before you and I work together, I'll be honest, the word active learning I didn't use in my vocabulary. I don't know if that was because I wasn't a primary specialist or I wasn't a PE teacher. I'm not quite sure, but can I just ask you a question to both of you? Could I ask for a simple definition of what is active learning? So let's start with Lauren. How would you define active learning?
It's interesting, Ross, because even within the more kind of academic research literature, there are so many terms that are used, and they differ, for example, between North America and how they would be called in Europe. One common term, actually, which I quite like, is movement integration, because I think that's quite a kind of a flexible, holistic term, because actually active learning can be lots of different things. So it could be delivering a whole lesson actively. It could be delivering a lesson outside, for example, where there's lots of light activity. There could be just breaks in seated learning. So this could be with curricula or outside of curricula. So really there's lots of different ways of delivering learning through active means or through movement. And these could be at a vigorous intensity and be very short, or they could be over a longer duration and be more kind of light intensity activity. They could be with curricula, with learning, or even without, where they kind of have the energizer breaks or the shake-up breaks, which I think lots of schools are probably quite familiar with. So I think in general, I kind of use the word movement integration as well as part of that. I guess one thing that's on the periphery of active learning is actually changing the environment of a classroom to promote activity, and this could often just be standing, which is a form of activity. So something that's hit the media quite a lot is the use of standing desks. I'm standing at my standing desk at the moment. So that's another alternative as well.
It's hard to see that if you are standing or sitting, but yeah, that's interesting that you pointed that out. Right, great. Now, there's the academic version. Jon, as a teacher, could you give us your definition of what active learning means to you?
Yeah, funny enough, today I've been writing a keynote conference, a keynote speech, and I've written, it's called active learning, it's called physically active learning, and it's called movement integration. So whichever one of those, I mean, for me, exactly, it's just about getting children up and about, bums off seats, and actually thinking, for example, with our maths and our English, do we have to be sat down to learn those subjects, or can we take learning, can we take it outside, can we take it to the gym in the hall? Actually, can we just be in the classroom? But again, as we've said, just integrating some movement into it. And of course, we'll explore why we would want to do that and the benefits are. But simply, bums off seats, non-sedentary behaviour, and getting children up and about.
Fantastic. Now, Lauren, I'd like to talk to you about your research and your expertise a little bit more. The first question I've got for you is the kind of role that active learning plays in supporting children's health and well-being. We all know that active learning and looking after yourself is important. I guess it's a dialogue we are talking about a lot more than we were maybe a decade ago. But could you just give us a few insights, a few recommendations, some research headlines, please?
Yeah, sure. I think the challenge you always get when you ask an academic this is that often the research is not completely conclusive on anything. And I think that's just the reality. There's lots of different ways of measuring, lots of different populations. And we often don't get the same results when we measure twice in the same population, let alone in different populations. Mm-hmm. But what we have shown is that there's really good evidence to suggest that active learning, as one might expect, increases physical activity and also decreases time spent sitting within the classroom. So usually if an intervention, for example, is delivered well, we absolutely see that, and we have very good robust measures of measuring that, for example, using devices such as movement trackers to measure that. So with that, if we can believe that we can increase physical activity and decrease sitting time, we have a host of evidence which suggests that if we can increase physical activity, for example, by 10, 15 minutes per day of children, then we can extrapolate that out and we can know there can be a whole host of benefits, whether they be physical. So this could be cardiometabolic health benefits such as blood pressure, lipids, glucose control. Mm-hmm. It could be around muscular strength, fitness, bone development, but also those really important kind of mental health benefits. So, for example, decreasing stress and anxiety, there's a lot of strong evidence which suggests that the more active a child is, the better those are. And then there's also those kind of ones around increasing confidence, which we absolutely see in the children and adolescent population. So while we don't necessarily have very good evidence to suggest that active lessons actually leads to those physical and mental health benefits, we do have lots of good evidence to suggest that they actually increase physical activity, decrease sedentary behavior, and we know that those increase in physical activity will have those knock-on benefits, especially if they're done over a prolonged period of time.
Sure. Now, I've looked at some of your research that you shared with me, and you looked at the kind of patterns of UK children, particularly over the last decade. And I know you've probably got some insights into what happened during the pandemic and prior to the pandemic, using mobile devices, kids exercising less, general obesity stats and things. But could you give us a broad, I know it's a really trying to develop my own understanding of academic research, but it's a very poor question to an academic. But could you give us a broad overview of some of your insights?
Yes, sure, Ross. So we know we've got reasonable surveillance data. I think we could be doing better within the UK about how we measure our whole population, our whole child and young people population in terms of physical activity. But we do have some good data to suggest that the physical activity levels of children and young people have gone down. So the most recent data, which I've got to always read this because I always forget the name of the survey, but it's basically Sport England survey, which is Active Lives Children and Young People survey. Mm-hmm. That's one of our most recent data. It is self-reported, so with that comes a little bit of limitations. There's probably some self-report bias that comes in here, mm-hmm. but that's our most recent data. And what that suggests is pre-pandemic, that about 18% of children and young people were meeting physical activity guidelines. And just as a reminder, physical activity guidelines is for our children on average to be achieving at least 60 minutes of physical activity per day throughout the whole week.
18%.
So only 18%, there was a slight gender difference with about 20% of boys meeting the physical activity guidelines compared to about 14% of girls. And we quite often see that gender difference with girls being less active than boys at every age through childhood and adolescence. Now, one thing I do want to stress is that while we do see that a large percent of the school day in traditional schools, about 70% of the school day is spent sitting, we actually don't believe that that has changed over time. So we don't believe that actually schools are less active or promoting more sitting than they were previously. But what we do believe is there's been an erosion of lifestyle embedded physical activity outside of the classroom. And I think you can probably all have experienced this yourselves, or can probably reflect on maybe your own childhood versus maybe some of your students or maybe some of your children's childhood now. So we have less opportunities for active commuting. There's concerns around perceived safety of our children roaming further away. There's the absolute kind of monopoly that we've had with screens in our children's house, which means that it's actually much more acceptable and much more appealing for children to sit for very long periods of time outside of school.
I'm also aware of a piece of research where break and lunchtime has reduced in our English state schools over the last decade also.
Absolutely. And there has been some pressures on physical education, which obviously, although that's not the primary purpose, is a good source of physical activity throughout the school day. I'm
going to bring Jon back in. Thank you, Lauren. Jon, can you, based on some of the information that Lauren's been sharing with us, what does teachers and schools tell you about the kind of state of the nation with children's mental health and well-being, and some of the things that they're trying to do to resolve some of these issues?
Well, interesting, I think with regards to COVID, when schools and teachers began to return, one of the questions that we asked them is, what are you most worried about with children returning to school? And of course, there was probably a long list, but the top three things were gaps in children's attainment, gaps in learning, which you can understand because obviously schools were closed for a long period of time. The second thing was lack of activity, teachers really noticing that. And that might be that they're noticing it physically because children are coming back and perhaps overweight, or they've just noticed that in terms of talking to the children and knowing what they've perhaps got up to. And then the third one was about anxiety and mental and emotional well-being of their children. And of course, that's again where we can think in terms of making the school day more active and getting away from this 70% of perhaps sedentary behaviour is can we address gaps in learning and have the children active and perhaps meet some of those emotional and mental kind of things that we need to by doing something such as active learning. But yeah, certainly we know that the world in itself is more sedentary and
we'll come back to TeachActive in a bit more detail, but part of your resources that you provide teachers is to promote active learning in English and maths particularly, isn't it?
Yeah, I think rather than asking teachers sometimes to do more, sometimes as teachers we feel that the whole problems of the nation could be upon us, whether that's whatever issues it may be. And we know that schools have to try and help children to achieve at least 30 minutes of that 60 minutes a day. So rather than asking them to do more, which can sometimes be, it can seem too much or unsustainable or there isn't time, then actually just by embedding it into what they're already doing and saying, well, actually take what you're already doing, but introduce movement, then perhaps that can be a real win for the teacher and a win for the children as well.
Thank you, Jon. Lauren, in part of your paper that you shared with me, and we'll probably find some links to share when we circulate the resources with people watching, but you mentioned something about the critical window, those first 10 years. Could you elaborate and tell us what that means specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly a lot of evidence, a lot of rationale for focusing. And I would say it's the first 10 years, but actually I would say it's probably the first 18 years of life, which are really important. And one of the main reasons is that we know that physical inactivity, so those children that are not meeting physical activity guidelines, tracks really well into adulthood. So if we have a child that's inactive, they are very unlikely to become an active adult. If you think about the amounts of years we have in adulthood, that will lead to increased cardiovascular disease and lots of other kind of problems for the physical health of the individual, but also a burden on the NHS system. What we do see is that those that are physically active are more likely. They're not absolutely going to be. We obviously know lots of children that were active as children and maybe aren't active as an adult, but they're more likely to become active adults. So if we can install those positive behaviours during childhood and adolescence, then they are more likely to be active adults. The other thing regarding the critical window is that there's something called physical literacy. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if there's a critical window by which we need to teach children certain skills, certain motor control activities, and if we do that, they have lots of tools in their toolbox by which they can then be active as adolescents, but also active as adults. So, for example, there are certain motor control skills that you need to be able to pick up a tennis racket as an adult and play tennis, for example. So it kind of increases your options. The last thing about the critical window is in terms of health, there are certain critical periods where physical activity is absolutely essential. So if, for example, we're talking about active lessons and we're talking about vigorous activity where they're jumping up and down, that can actually have benefits to bone health. And we know that about 80 to 90% of all bone is laid down during adolescence. So if you miss that critical period in terms of physical activity, that can actually have impacts for that individual for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, I know that teachers watching, particularly school leaders and dare I say policymakers, will be waiting to hear where schools that are particularly promoting active learning get better outcomes. And often we know outcomes is defined as test scores. Are you aware of any research or any people that you work with where when they do X, Y, Z, this, I know Jon will bring Jon in because he does have evidence, but have you got any academic references that you could talk about?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about systematic reviews, and systematic reviews are where someone has gone and reviewed all the literature, and I can talk maybe about specific papers. So to talk about one pioneer in the field, his name is Charles or Chuck Hillman, and he's from the United States. And actually he was the one that really pioneered the kind of association generally between physical activity and cognition. And this really does lend itself to active learning and cognition. Mm-hmm. So what he showed is that if you run a child, for example, on a treadmill for a set period of time, and then you get them to do some form of cognitive skill test afterwards, they tend to perform better. And the laypersons, because I'm not a cognitive researcher, kind of explanation about this is that there's an increased blood flow to the brain, and that oxygenation of the brain actually leads to kind of very acute benefits in terms of learning, and particular in terms of attention on task. So the time spent on task is enhanced straight after you've done particularly moderate to vigorous physical activity. So you can absolutely see how this can relate to active lessons, because if you have a short break, and then even if you seat the child back down and get them to do, for example, a maths task, they should be able to concentrate better. He also did some other research which suggests that over a period of time, so the kind of chronic influences, is there might actually be prolonged benefits in terms of cognition. And this relates predominantly to the increased blood flow, but actually this can lead to changes in the structure of the brain. So this can be the changes from the white and grey matter, so the ratio, but also between synapses in the brain. So there is probably more limited evidence, but some to suggest that there could actually be this kind of prolonged benefit.
I read an interesting research paper last week where they tested people having naps between 6 and 30 minutes, and it helped that cognitive offload, I suppose, the expression, and it supported their memory retention. I found that a great excuse to have a nap after you've done a bit of exercise.
I was going to say, I don't think I need an excuse, but
yeah, not when we get a bit older. It's pretty easy, but for children, perhaps the challenge is to build that into the rhythm of school life. Jon, have you got any examples of schools that you work with who are that question I posed to Lauren earlier, you know, when we brutally use that term outcomes and we want test scores, evidence of schools, I know we can maybe talk about Ben Levinson's school that we talked about in the past, but schools that are doing great things physically, that are getting great outcomes defined as attendance, behaviour, exclusions, not just test scores. What have you got?
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly it, because I think that a lot of the time, you know, it's teachers. I love listening to Lauren, and I love looking at the research into these things as well. But often, equally, I like to listen to teachers who will tell me, okay, I'm on the shop floor and this is the difference that I've seen on a day-to-day basis with my children. And whether that be with behaviour, with attendance, with attitudes, with an enjoyment of learning. And that's why we came into teaching, isn't it? And we know that attitudes are then strongly linked to attainment, and we're going to be more open and accessible to those things. We, you know, and so we work with over 1,000 schools in the UK. We're in 10 other international countries. So if I was to look at a few, I could tell you, you know, a Holy Family School in Surrey. The head teacher there, Steve Tyndall, fantastic, you know, and his staff there, and their maths results went from national averages to the top 2% of maths results nationwide. And if you asked him why, he would say active learning. Of course, his great staff, his great policies, is, you know, the many other things that go on, but active learning and the importance of physical activity at that school has been a real key to that. You mentioned Ben Levinson, of course, Primary School of the Year. Ben was awarded an OBE as well. And again, once again, someone who will talk about academic achievement. Gladys Street in Liverpool, I talk about them. Their maths results went up at 21% increase within 12 months. Duckmanton Primary School in Chesterfield, where their grammar for children achieving there went up from, again, national averages and up to 98%, which again was probably inconceivable to them at the start, but they've done it through this approach of either whole class active lessons or through doing it with interventions as well. And, you know, if I talk about Steve Tyndall there, I'll talk about a group of girls who, and often we hear about boys, but a group of girls who weren't going to achieve, who felt that they couldn't do it. And actually, by bringing their self-esteem and their confidence, and then attainment followed as well. So it's great to hear it, as well as the research and as well as the background that we know with the links with cognition, is that teachers reporting, actually, we do this in our school and it makes a difference. And then committing to doing it for the long term as well, which I think the proof is in the pudding now. It falls off.
Of course, yeah. And we'll come back to some of your TeachActive solutions in a moment, John. So just for a reminder for people watching, we're in a webinar with Professor Lauren Sherar and Jon Smedley of TeachActive, looking at how active learning supports cognition in primary pupils. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, you can leave a comment and we'll pose the question to our guests. We will share, we've got 1 or 2 slides. We're going to do a little demo of TeachActive later on in about 10, 15 minutes or so. And we'll circulate the recording with all participants. Lauren, I want to come back to this question in terms of what would be your, what are the recommendations from your research in academic circles of what schools can do to help break the cycle or to help shape a positive cycle?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest recommendation is to take a whole school approach, if possible. There's been quite a lot of work in the past for people to come in and do something that's very specific. But I think if it can be a whole school approach, which engages all people, particularly senior leaders within a school, but also where possible, I know it's hard, parents as well. So I think that if there can be a plan by which you can engage physical activity throughout the culture and the whole day, I think that's more sustainable, and it has been shown to be more effective. So examples of how that can be done. I do think, I know I'm on this webinar, but I'm fully converted to that active lessons is a really, really important strategy. I think that it can be something that can just be embedded within the culture of learning. And it's something that actually hopefully would then be translated through to when a child gets to be an adult and is in the workplace, that they will actually demand that they can't sit for 8 hours per day, that they actually can learn learn and perform in slightly different ways, such as walking meetings. Other ways is things like the Daily Mile. That's caught a lot of attention.
My son loves the Daily Mile. He's a pro at it now.
And there are lots of different, I mean, the Daily Mile's got a great name, but there's lots of other providers. There's the Kids Run Free, which do Marathon Kids, slightly different version to the Daily Mile, but is actually promoted through the lunchtime and break times rather than during the class time. But again, there's lots of developments in this area with goal setting, rewards, celebration, assemblies, which really helps to make these really kind of fun and can be an absolutely embedded kind of part of the active day. I think the other things that are really important is trying to promote active transport to and from school. I think, again, that teaches a child that physical activity is not just physical education, it's not just sport, but it's how we live our lives. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think, having teachers role model to model it. So we've been in schools that have done the Daily Mile, and it is much more effective if the teachers are participating too. So it's not something that the children are doing. And to be honest, physical activity levels are low across the board. Our adults are less active than our children. So if we can get the staff being more active throughout their working day, then I think the whole school is better off.
So all those times in my career when I should have gone up at the front of assembly to do a press up or the 100 meters on sports day, I should have been a true role model. Let me bring John back in. John, did you do the 100-meter sprint in front of your children at school?
I think I probably did, probably against other teachers, in particular a guy called Chris, who really get very competitive, without a doubt. Or certainly when we did the Daily Mile, all the staff would do it and join in as well.
Fantastic. Now, John, I want to ask, TeachActive, for people watching for the first time and not sure what TeachActive is, could you just give us a general overview? Later on, we're going to have a little play inside or look at the software later, but could you just give us a general overview? We've got our little slide I can put up here for people to see. Let me just put that.
Yes, of course. As you're bringing that up, I'll just explain. So probably when I was a P advisor and a deputy head, what I did do is devised a file of ideas to support the staff within my school and the schools that I was working in. And it had such a positive response in terms of it was part of an Ofsted sharing a good practice paper. It was part of a DFE international project. And what we decided to do is actually turn this from a file of 70 ideas into the online resource that we have today. So there is 3,500 lesson plans written by maths and English experts, consultants, about how we deliver the maths in the English curriculum, but through physical activity. All areas of maths, of reading, of writing, and simply giving teachers lots of ideas. All the lesson plans are there, all the resources are there. We're supporting the workload agenda, and we're actually saying to teachers, actually, this is fun, this is enjoyable, this is going to help academic achievement and so many more benefits, but also it's going to save you hours of planning time as well. So it just really allows what we're talking about to perhaps come to life and be sustainable within many schools.
Now, you were existing before the pandemic. Obviously, you've had a huge spike in people accessing resources through natural having to work from home, etc. But obviously with the increased agenda of mental health and physical learning, you've seen a real spike in how people are using your resources. You've obviously created a lot more materials and are slowly branching out. Just tell us kind of generally, where people are using this across the country, overseas, your kind of upcoming plans, and we'll look at the software a little bit later on.
Okay, we do support schools all over the UK. You did a map at the start of this, and if we did that, I think we're in certainly every single county and about just over 1,000 schools now. How do they use it? They use it whole class, but also they use it as an intervention program as well. Certainly for maths, and then for the English, again, whole class interventions, guided reading with regards to sessions like that as well. We have had more and more schools come on. I think that certainly the DFE have asked schools to prioritise physical activity for many of the reasons that we're talking about today, about those bigger and wider benefits. And I just think that with perhaps some schools and perhaps us all have realised over the past 18 months the importance of physical activity to our emotional and our mental well-being, as well as many other things. So we've had lots of other schools come on board.
Great. Now we'll look at the software a little bit later. I'm going to bring Lauren in just for a couple more questions. I'm thinking of those teachers, head teachers who think, right, I don't have resources, I don't have the funding to buy software like yourself, Jon, TeachActive. Maybe you want to mention the sports funding things that are available. To Lauren, perhaps people that are saying they're busy, league table pressure, Ofsted. I don't have time to take kids out. All that perception and myths about the benefits of physical learning versus the traditional maths, English. Lots of questions there. To you, Lauren, first of all, what would be your recommendations for people that are struggling to balance that accountability side, the external pressures to try and reap those benefits back in their schools for their young people?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Ross. I think we did a study which looked at the implementation of physically active learning over a whole school year. And I think one of the biggest challenges for teachers was that kind of the perception that externals would think they'd lost control of the class, for example, or they weren't taking the kind of teaching of their students seriously. So I think there's a couple of things that could be done for that. I think absolutely getting senior leaders support and trying to increase the awareness for the benefits of the other teachers and students as well. But so there's kind of a shared understanding of the benefits, but also what the aims are of active lessons, because they are absolutely to enhance the kind of academic outcomes, but also the experiences that the pupils have while learning. So as Jon mentioned, there's really good evidence to suggest that enjoyment of learning increases, but also there's less disruption amongst key individuals, and particularly those that are more at risk for not performing well in the classroom. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other one is communicating to parents. So really showing them the benefits. I think there's BBC Super Movers had a campaign which really kind of really did quite a good job of raising awareness with parents about the kind of importance of active learning. It's in the media all the time about the sitting pandemic that we have. So I think that it's a good time to be saying to parents, look, if you actually hear that your children have been coming back with a new teacher perhaps and have been having a lot of fun being active, then that is actually a good thing. We're still taking it seriously. This is kind of just a slightly different way of delivering the same high quality teaching that we have always done. So I think communication back to parents is really, really important.
Thank you. And Jon, in terms of, I guess, an English perspective, because we know we've got people watching from other parts of the world, but maybe there's a solution for them. But how could schools, head teachers access some funding to purchase physical active learning, in your case, TeachActive, and we'll show people what that looks like shortly. But what's your wisdom there?
Well, I'd echo everything that Lauren's just said as well, not to not answer your question at the moment in terms of the whole school buy-in. And, teachers are brilliant, and teachers often can do this with their own fantastic ideas. They know their class, they know their children, and they're so creative. But we do know that teachers are very, very busy. So that's the solution of TeachActive if schools want to look at it. And if so, we are lucky at the moment that we do have PE and sport funding. So every school in England, and some of our international friends won't get this, but they may have their own version. But the PE and sport funding allows every school in England to get £16,000 per year plus £10 per pupil. Mm-hmm. There's a criteria of 5 things. And the first thing is about getting children to achieve the 60 minutes of activity a day. The second one is about raising whole school improvement and achievement through this as well. So certainly we can do that, and schools can use that money in order to fund TeachActive and a license that comes with free training and free CPD so that we launch into your school. Because one thing that's really important to us is that we don't just buy a resource and it doesn't get used, but actually that teachers, exactly what we've referred to there, that teachers understand the why. Why would I want to do this? What are the benefits? What have other schools seen this? We know that teachers buy in for different reasons. So we can look at enjoyment, we can look at activity data, we can look at academic success. And then we allow, to put that in so that the schools can get maximum impact as well. So hopefully good use of money, because that's really important.
And of course, they can. We'll talk about the TeachActive shortly, but people can log in and have a play for free, can't they? And play around with your resources.
They can, and if they go to the website, all I say is you can go on a free trial and you can get access to some games and play and have some fun with them. But you can also on there just book a one-to-one demo with myself. It's 15 minutes, and it just allows teachers and school leaders to make a well-informed decision. Because I'm not going to sell you anything. I'm just going to show it you and see.
I'll put those links in the chat box. Lauren, I've got a question for you. Research looking at patterns and things. What are your immediate concerns with physical learning? I know we talked about the kind of initial kind of 10 years and things like that, but with social media around us and constant devices, lack of exercise, where do you see this going in the next 2 or 3 years post-pandemic?
So I think there's a lot of pressure, I would say pressure, and it is pressure on schools to be kind of part of the solution. So, for example, the government released their childhood obesity strategy call for action. In that, most of the kind of calls for action were based at schools, and that's because the students are a captive audience. They're very easy to access all children because the majority of children go to schools. So it has put the onus back on schools, but I think this is a really exciting opportunity. So I think schools are an important part of the solution, but I think it can also enhance the kind of the learning, the experiences that children have in school. And I think in that way, I think it's really important. In terms of your screens, I think it is the biggest challenge that parents particularly have, but potentially education providers have, is how they manage how much time children spend on screens. And I think actually screens can be part of the solution as well as a large part of the problem. So I think actually in terms of active lessons, there are a lot of things that are online, Go Noodle, as well as TeachActive resources, a lot of free to access super movers had for more of the younger children. There's a lot of kind of resources that are available to us that would not have been available before the internet, before screens, before all of the kind of innovations that we've had. So I think it's absolutely balancing kind of the pressures that we have with the kind of technology that we have available to us. And I think it's supporting schools to be kind of part of the solution while making sure that they don't feel the pressures, as John alluded to earlier. A lot of pressures are put on schools, and absolutely the academic achievement and outcomes and that side of it is their core business. But physical activity can be used to actually help them achieve their goals, I think.
I've got one last question for you, Lauren, because I know you're very busy. What resources does Loughborough have? Maybe it's a bit of a loose question, but is there anything specifically that you have for parents, for pupils, or for schools that you're developing?
We are working with lots of partners, so we tend to work with providers more than kind of producing our own resources. But we do have a number of resources. We have some around nutrition, some around physical activity. We do have an evidence briefing that comes out around physical activity. That's our National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine. So if you go onto our website, anyone that's interested generally in physical activity, some of it's around children and young people, some of it's around adults and other populations, but it does give you a really kind of a nice snippet, not too much detail, kind of overview of the evidence that's coming out. It gives a little bit of a translation of some of the more heavy research that's come out more recently. So I think they can be quite useful, I think, for any practitioner that's really kind of motivated to get children more active.
Sure. So I'm going to chase you, Lauren, for that link, and we'll circulate it with people that are watching who might want to sign up for that briefing. It sounds very interesting. But Professor Lauren Sherar, I'm going to let you go. I know you've got one or two things that you need to do, but thank you for your time, and thank you for all your wisdom. And I look forward to working with you again. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, Lauren.
Great. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, John. And goodbye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Lauren.
So any questions for Lauren, we'll send them over to her and answer them when we circulate this video. But I just thought I'd bring John in for the last 10 minutes just to talk about TeachActive in a little bit more detail, do a little walkthrough potentially if we can get John to maybe... I've got some slides, John, if you want to share those, or if you want to log into your website, we see. But we also got a video that I know Lauren wanted to share. So I'm just going to play that first. And I know Lauren's still on the line, just in case she wants to say anything, she can let me know. But let me just put this video up. We'll see how we get on in terms of the technology, but we must just give you a little background into physical active learning. So here we go. Let's see how we get on.
Our children's lives often involve a lot of sitting, driving to and from school, in the classroom,
So there you go, folks. The message is really clear. You know, my life as a classroom teacher, design technology, we were more times than not on our feet, moving around. But you've got the research from Lauren that's been shared, the pandemic, devices. We know that we need to try and build in these opportunities for our young people more explicitly in the classroom, particularly if they're not getting those opportunities at home. Jon, TeachActive, I'll put your slides up. You let me know if you want me to navigate through them. Let's put these back up. Or if we want to actually log into the website live. But let's just to give people a little gist of you know, what the resources are available. If I put those up for people to see full size. Do you want to just give us a little introduction, Jon, a little bit more depth?
Yeah, okay. So as I mentioned before, so TeachActive, an online resource that provides teachers, teaching assistants with the lesson plans and resources on how to deliver the English and the maths curriculum, but through physical activity, through movement, through getting children up and about. 3,500 lesson plans. It covers every single objective, so it can really sit alongside and complement any scheme of work. TeachActive isn't a scheme of work, it's just a bank of ideas of resources. So for those who are perhaps using your Maths No Problem or your White Rose, or perhaps the Power of Reading, it will sit alongside it and, as I say, complement them really well. The benefits I think we've spoken about, and you know, there's probably a list as long as my arm, but certainly by doing this, what we're finding is that schools are becoming more active, is that we're not having that 70% sedentary fact, the fact that the children are achieving more physical activity, but it's helping to really enjoy, you know, that enjoyment of learning, helping with attainment, and then all of those wider benefits of social skills, teamwork, resilience, social skills, all of those things. And I think what's really important at the moment is how it can really support, you know, cognition and the learning journey as well. You know, helping that learning to be, I suppose, engaging from the teacher first of all, to make sure that it goes into the short-term memory. But then we know that from the short-term memory, we hear this phrase of stickiness, or let's get it into the long-term memory so that children can master it. And therefore, let's do it in lots of different ways. So TeachActive is ideal for that. And then also, you and I, Ross, will have both taught that lesson where we think, oh, that went well. And 2 weeks later, the children have completely forgotten about it. So again, it's really good for retrieval and making sure that children have retained information.
Sure. I've stuck some of the resources on for people to see. So tell us what people can see on the screen.
Yeah, a typical example on the left-hand side there is just, you'll see that it's got the year group, it's got the name of the game, the area of maths and the objective. This is a game where actually the children go to one problem and the answer tells them which problem to go to next, and the answer to next until they've completed all 20 problems. So many schools will have done maths orienteering before, and the children love it, but it takes you all Sunday afternoon to plan it. So here it's all done for you. Similar to here, with matching analog and digital clocks in year 2, whether that's whole class or as an intervention. And that flexibility that it allows, I think teachers like, because they can, rather than thinking I need to come up with the idea, make the resources, it's all done for them, and they can spend that time thinking, how can I best use this for my class?
I like the sound of this one, treasure hunt punctuation.
Yeah, well, something that actually we don't tend to do a lot of is or we do it, but in a very closed way, in terms of having a look at editing our writing, proofreading our writing, and checking for mistakes. So we can do it like this and get children to master those key skills, but again, just doing it a bit of an active way. And similar, I think, on the next view, if you flick on, Mosh, this time, can we, reading is a big thing at the moment. Can we foster this love of reading? And many schools are telling me at the moment this is a huge, huge issue. Even with getting children to want to learn, want to read at home. So actually, can we do that through physical activity? Well, yes, we can. And you can see here that TeachActive not only provides the lesson plan and the resources, but also the texts as well, whether that's stories, whether it's poems, whether it's information texts. And again, it's all pitched at the right level for the children that are going to be accessing it.
So there's a good chance, John, that you've saved thousands of teachers an enormous amount of time by reducing their workload. Would that be a good thing to say?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think so. That is the aim, and of course, I think that's what a lot of teachers feedback in terms of this. As we said, saves them hours of planning time, and is something that they really enjoy using.
And I think what I'll do is I'll just bring up your website screen here so people can just see what it looks like, and we'll put the links in the chat box. But here is the TeachActive home screen. John, if you just maybe tell people what they can find and see. We've obviously got the link to the free trial and demo.
I'd encourage you to sign up to a demo. As I said, 15 minutes, and let me show you the website, show you how easy to use it is. I did one today, two today with different head teachers, and I can then talk about the training which we could include as part of that. But on here, you'll see what some of our customers say, some of those case studies. If you want to know the difference and the impact that it's making, read some of those case studies that you'll see there. You can see some of the quality assurance, some of the things we spoke about, the multiple awards that we've won, the parliamentary review that we were part of, our schools that have been praised by Ofsted, we were published by the Department of Education. So we've had some, real good quality assurance, and we've been working and supporting schools for 6 years. So I think that also says something about, our ongoing support for our schools as well.
Now, I'm going to ask the question because I know one or two teachers, they obviously can play around with the free trial independently, and there'll be the odd teacher that needs to take this to their school leadership team and then to have that money conversation. Can I put you in a corner, and could you give us a ballpark figure for people if that is useful?
Yeah, of course. It's an annual subscription that schools pay to access TeachActive. If you want to, you can buy maths and English separately. So for one subject, it's £575. For both, actually, and for both, it's £975. That gives you access to all of your teachers. It gives you access to all of your parents as well, because we have an active homework as part of this. So rather than giving sedentary homework, let's give fun games and activities to really, again, engage children and not put them off learning. It gives you unlimited access for that, including the free training as well, which I mentioned. We do have a 3-year option, which many schools are using, and schools will know their PE and sport funding is due into their budget this month. So I think we can tell that as well, because it's been a very busy start to the month already.
And obviously, you've seen a big spike in people accessing these resources throughout the pandemic. I know it's a very hard thing to evaluate how we are living and working, because we're still in the pandemic, I suppose. But at least from an English perspective, how are you seeing people using your resources? Is there still a huge uptake given what's happened to us all?
Yeah, I think even more so. I think there's a big movement at the moment for schools to become more physically active. There's an initiative by, set up, it's the Pupils movement, but set up by Youth Sport Trust and Bupa, called Well Schools. So if you're interested in this agenda, I'd certainly look at Well Schools, and it's a free to sign up movement of schools who are all sharing the passion to sort of say, well, actually, we care about emotional and mental well-being as much as we do about academic success. So we're seeing a big uptake, and we're seeing schools, it's not hard to introduce, Ross, that's what I'd say. And for those head teachers thinking, I really don't want to introduce another initiative, actually the first thing I say to teachers is, you're going to love this because I'm going to make your life easier, not harder.
Well, and there you go. Yeah. So it's about making everyone's life easier and ultimately trying to make a difference to our young people. Now, people watching live, you're very quiet this evening. Have you got any questions for Lauren or for John? in the session. We can put some comments and links on the chat box. Otherwise, we are going to start to wind things down. But the power of TeachActive. Jon's had me doing press ups in my garden as part of promoting some of the brilliant resources that he has. And I'm looking forward to visiting you next Monday, Jon. Actually, coming to visit your team in Chester, which is, for people watching outside the UK, northwest England. Beautiful Chester.
If we've got any people joining us from UAE as well, we are heading to the guest show in Dubai next month. So if we do have anyone and they're interested in having a meeting or us to come and see their school, we're hoping to deliver a CPD workshop free for schools out there as well. So if we do have any schools in Dubai or visiting the guest show, please do get in touch as well.
Fantastic. So there you've had it, folks. I'm going to start to wrap things up. We know that well-being, mental health is important. We need some practical tools for our parents, for our young people, and for our teachers to start making a big difference. And in some respects, changing that narrative about what is active learning, how can we manage our physical health. And you'll have seen some great wisdom from Jon. So Jon, thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Your wonderful resource. And you'll have heard Lauren earlier sharing some of her research into cognition, active learning, and how we can all look after ourselves. Professor from Loughborough University. So it's been great to have you all here. Again, I'm just going to ask for any comments. I've still got Jon on the line and Lauren actually still around, but I've got a question from Karen. So if Lauren, are you happy to come back in if you're still there? And Jon, I've got this question here from Karen. It's great to get some questions from people. So I guess this is the informal bit now. But there's a question. Lauren, let me start with you. And thank you for still staying on the line. I guess from kind of some of the things that you heard us say, is there anything you want to add before we finish?
No, I think it's just to say that I think there's a will across the nation from our government all the way through to researchers, to schools, to support this. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to working with lots of different providers, including TeachActive, on how they can kind of enhance their provision, constantly reflect on implementation so that it can kind of carry on evolving and be as best as it can moving forward.
Fantastic. And Jon, there's the question. Early years curriculum?
Yeah, I'm pleased to say, Karen, the answer to that is yes. In the early days when we did years 1 to 6, foundation teachers weren't my biggest fan. But yes, and we rewrote it all over the August, so it's all mapped to the new EYFS curriculum. It's mapped to Development Matters, which I know is not statutory, but I think many schools use, and then to the early learning goals as well. So yes, it is.
And there you go. So last opportunity, folks, for any final questions. Otherwise, I have been your host. I didn't introduce myself at the start, but I guess most of you know who I am through Teacher Toolkit. Lauren, thanks once again for your expertise and for all your wisdom. I'm becoming, in my wiser years, much more interested in the memory and the synapses side of things. I find it very fascinating. I think it's one thing I probably didn't have in my teacher training. Yes, child development, child psychology, but supporting that growth of new neurons and things, I think it's a really fascinating discourse that we need to have as teachers. And I don't know if you're, obviously you'll be teaching these things with people around you, but I don't know if you're aware of any teacher training courses that explicitly teach that type of stuff for teachers and if it's relevant or not.
I think it's a good point. I think it could be absolutely included within the kind of general growth and development that teachers will hopefully should learn as part of their teacher education. I think there's a really positive move, and I'm not sure how far we are with it, to actually include strategies like active lessons into teacher education. We are providers of teacher education, particularly in PE and maths here at Loughborough University. So we have actually got a good opportunity to kind of case study and try out some of that here, which makes sense being that we're at Loughborough and we're very kind of motivated towards physical activity and sports. So
yeah, I always think of my teacher training, going through the clearing. Well, I think I missed out on one A-level point to get to Loughborough, so I ended up at Goldsmiths. But such is life. Maybe I would have been a lot more physically active than I perhaps would have been now if I ended up at Loughborough. But I remember visiting in one of my football tours to Loughborough, and they were another level of fitness without a question. So different set of human beings and physical. It's a phenomenal institution with that, for sure. John, any concluding remarks, any questions? You can see Karen was very happy with your early years answer.
And Karen, hopefully we can do a one-to-one together. No, with regards to the cognition, I always find it very interesting as well. And again, I've been doing some work on that today in terms of one thing we're not taught as teachers is actually how children do learn and how the learning how the learning journey happens and what takes place. So we think that if we can do this fantastic lesson and it goes into the children's short-term memory, then that's a tick. And actually, it's probably why we know we can't go into a lesson and judge a lesson on the 60 minutes that we're in there. God forbid if that happens, because actually the learning, it's whether it's still there 2 weeks later and whether it's in the long-term memory. And I know that physically active learning can really support that as well. So yeah, really interesting and something that I enjoy reading and doing a bit more research about as well.
My alarm is telling us that it's time to switch off for a cognitive load. Apologies for that interruption, but it's been a really interesting discussion. And John, thank you for your time, and Lauren for your time and your wisdom. I'm going to leave it there, folks. I'm going to circulate this video to your inboxes with any resources, some links to Lauren's research, the Loughborough newsletter, and to all the TeachActive resources. John, Lauren, I hope you have a lovely evening. I'm going to go off for a nap to help develop my synapses. And I shall see you both soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks all. Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.